So if you have a child who has CP who's in the countryside and is a part of that family unit who's assisting with the herding and with the work at home, it becomes that question of like, what does it mean to be included in your community? And if that child has a role in the family and is able to do some of the herding work, is that inclusion?
Ripple Effects is brought to you by the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. The National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange is a project of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, designed to increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange between the United States and other countries, and supported in its implementation by Mobility International USA. I'm Justin Harford, a project coordinator with Mobility International USA and your host for Ripple Effects. Our next guest served in the Peace Corps Mongolia from 2003 to 2005 as an English teacher in a community of 40,000 people. She was assigned to work in a mainstream school, but was surprised to find that many of her students had disabilities, and they were just included. They were not in separate schools or sheltered at home. What's more, the majority of their support came from their non-disabled peers. It was so compelling that she came back to Mongolia on a Fulbright to research inclusion and disability in rural Mongolia. As she explained in the interview, it gets you thinking about just what inclusion means and what it should look like in a given context. It also goes to show that sometimes people's view of disability can pleasantly surprise us.
So we are here today with Annie Tolkien from Accessible College. And Annie, you're here to join us because I was originally going to do a couple other podcast interviews looking at experiential exchanges and conceptions of disability abroad. Those kind of didn't work out, but then this interview pretty much kills two birds with one stone. So that's good. We're excited about that. And so I wonder if I'll just let you do an introduction of yourself. You know, you've been in the world of disability for a long time, and kind of started your career off as Peace Corps. I kind of wonder if you could just get into sharing with us though what you're doing now and how you kind of got to that point, and also how you got to how you've helped also encourage people with disabilities to go abroad.
Sure. So it was a kind of a long path to get to starting up Accessible College. When I finished my undergraduate degree, I studied education at DePaul University, and I went straight from DePaul into Peace Corps. So I was in Peace Corps Mongolia from 2003 to 2005. And there I was living in Choibilsan, which is a large city. I guess it's large for Mongolia. It's not large by our standards, but large for Mongolia. It's about 40,000 people in far eastern Mongolia. And there I worked with Mongolian teachers who were teaching English. So I was a teacher trainer. And I worked with them on their English teaching skills, pedagogy, and just speaking and fluency skills, because most of them had been Russian teachers before or had just started to learn English and were assigned to be English teachers. So they didn't really have a grasp of the spoken language. They had really good grammar, but because they had learned it from books, their grammar was probably better than mine, but they didn't really know how to use English. So we worked a lot on that and using games in the classroom with students and things like that, because they used more of a Russian system, which was more like rote memorization and things like that. So I was trying to figure out how to engage the students more so that it was more experiential for the students as well. So I spent 2 years there in Eastern Mongolia, in Choibilsan, working with those teachers, and also working with NGOs, local NGOs. And I started an English language club and some other activities. I had a physical fitness class that I helped do at the local hospital. So I really became engaged in the community there and got to know lots of different people, including people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. And to clarify, your assignment was originally mainstream, right? But then you kind of, even though it was mainstream, you stumbled upon people with disabilities anyway.
Yeah. So in Mongolia, they follow kind of a Russian model, which is the Vygotskian model of separate schools, right? So there are separate schools for people who are blind and visually impaired. There are separate schools for students who are deaf. And most of those schools are in the capital city. So outside of the capital, most students are mainstreamed, including students with cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities. So you would see some of these students in the classrooms, and mind you, these class sizes are fairly large by some of our standards, I guess, depending on where you are in the US and what school you're talking about. But we're talking about like 40 students to a classroom. And so people are kind of packed in like sardines. But the students who may have had cognitive disabilities or other physical disabilities were often anchored by their peers. So their peers would make sure they were getting into the classroom, make sure they were kind of keeping up with whatever the class work was. It's part of this leftover communist model where you're assisting and supporting everybody else in the classroom too. I remember being kind of shocked about when you take a test in Mongolia, there's no sense of people like keeping the test to themselves. They're all chatting and talking about the answers and things like that. So that's kind of just a cultural nuance. And you'd say, no, we want to test your skills. And it was more of a community approach to testing. So
is that something the other teachers kind of had to explain to you ultimately? Like,
yeah, I mean, I observed it and I was like, what's going on here? And then I became more accustomed to it, and I found some interesting ways to kind of navigate that. But in a lot of ways, that's kind of a really interesting piece of that culture, in that you're not really leaving other people out. You're supporting them and helping them along, right? So, right. So I became kind of interested in that when I observed that during my time as a Peace Corps volunteer. After Peace Corps, I went on to University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I was studying special education. With a focus on international special education and accessibility issues, because Mongolia really lit that fire for me. I started to think more about inclusion and disability in general, and Western notions of disability and how they were traveling throughout the world, specifically around the Millennium Development Goals, which has a goal of inclusive education for students. So starting to think more about what does it mean to be included. What does inclusion look like in a developing country setting? And so I started playing with some of those ideas and learning more about that, and learning more about international education and disability in general. And I applied for a Fulbright, and I went back to Mongolia. I couldn't get enough of Mongolia. And so I went back to Mongolia for a year, for my Fulbright, and I did research on Mongolian teachers' perceptions of disability in the classroom.
Oh wow! Was this when you were doing graduate work, or?
Yep. So I did my Fulbright as a part of my graduate work, and that the Fulbright allowed me to do this research, which I then used for my thesis and for subsequent publications and conferences. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really an interesting thing that you found when you were in Peace Corps. And I mean, you started off in this mainstream school, and then you found that there were people with disabilities involved in all the classes. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because you would think more that you would see that in the city maybe, but then in the country you wouldn't. It's a fascinating story. It kind of flies in the face of maybe what somebody might think they're going to encounter when they go overseas. Like if you were a disabled person that you're going to volunteer in a rural community, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other really interesting piece about it is that, like, in the city, it kind of depends on, who you're standing in life and what type of disability that you have. There's a lot more stigma attached to intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome and even cerebral palsy. Because there just really isn't a lot of education around those disabilities, right? And so people don't really understand, and there's a lot of cultural kind of stuff that comes along with that as well, since Mongolians are typically, traditionally, I should say, Tibetan Buddhists. And so there's some people who believe that, they must have done something wrong in their, past life to have a child who has this disability. I'm not saying that all people believe that, but that is that is something that does come up in
It's
that.
definitely a cultural subtext.
Yeah. And yeah, no. So, when I was doing my Fulbright research, I did research in the city in Ulaanbaatar, which is also called UB, with stakeholders and with teachers. But I also worked to do research in 2 provinces, in the far eastern province, in Choibalsan, where I was for Peace Corps, and then in a far western province called Hoved. And those were also regional medical centers too. So I thought those would be good places to get both a kind of medical understanding of the landscape, talking to doctors and stakeholders about types of disabilities and things, and also hear from teachers who worked in those provinces as well. But what constantly came up is that teachers or people would always tell me, oh, we don't believe that here. We don't believe that, in that Buddhist kind of that issue of having stigma about people who have intellectual disabilities and carrying that over from a past life, and you must have done something wrong. We don't believe that here, but other people believe that. So there was this really interesting othering that was going on.
We're not like those people.
Yeah. So that was a really, I found that to be a really interesting outcome of the research. And I kind of wished that somebody would pick up that research that I did and take that even further and get a better understanding of othering in Mongolian society. So
it's almost like it kind of stems too from that thing. Like, I think all of us kind of want to be, on the right side of history, if you will, and nobody wants to be like, oh, I'm associated with anti-inclusion or, something that's not cool,
Yeah. And well, what becomes really interesting in this context too, is that whole idea of inclusion, about what it means to be included. So I think one of the examples that I talk about a lot is if you have a child with cerebral palsy who's a herder in the countryside in Mongolia. Mongolia is a country of about 3 million people. Half of those people live in the capital and half live across the rest of the country, which is about the size of Texas. So it's a huge landmass, not a lot of people. Lots of sheep and goats and yaks and camels. So if you have a child who has CP who's in the countryside and is a part of that family unit who's assisting with the herding and with the work at home, it becomes that question of like, what does it mean to be included in your community? And if that child has a role in the family and is able to do some of the herding work, is that inclusion? Should that child also be going to school with their peers in the countryside? And I think it becomes a little bit, I believe they should be going to school as well and have that opportunity, but it becomes a little bit tricky within the Mongolian context, where a lot of herders, are only getting an 8th grade education, if that, and aren't working outside of herding, so that if that's the best that your family is striving for, is that good enough for that child? So it's just an interesting kind of piece, food for thought, I guess.
We had that just reminded me of, we had a former staff member, Megan Smith, who used to work for us, and she's gone on to do a lot of amazing things since then. And we linked to a blog post she wrote about volunteering at an orphanage in Nepal. And I believe the title is something like Equal Right to be Discriminated Against, or the Equal Right to Discrimination. And she talks about how her experience as a woman in Nepal was kind of subservient. Like, she kind of would work for this one guy and kind of help him with a lot of do a lot of female type tasks, cleaning and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
then it was also as a disabled person, she was pretty much treated the same way as any other woman would be treated,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of within that cultural backdrop. So, I mean, I guess you could kind of say, is it really appropriate for a disabled person to be doing, certain kinds of what we would consider kind of to be basic tasks? But then
Mm-hmm.
essentially her experience was, it was kind of in the context of what she as a woman was expected to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think we all have to really take a look at the context in which we're operating, right? And
Yeah.
we're all carrying our, whatever background and, and ideas that we have, and we're bringing it into a different context. I mean, that's applicable right here in the United
Yeah.
States, right?
Or like with international development work too, right? Like we probably
Yeah.
go to countries, probably, I think you mentioned to me some projects in Mongolia, right? That were like
Yeah.
international development. Let's bring employment to the disabled people in Mongolia projects or.
Yeah, and bringing inclusive education. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot
that's
of
what else.
funding that was thrown at, integrated kindergartens and inclusive kindergartens and preschools. They were starting out at kind of that level, and then hoping to move forward. And so much money just just went, just came and went, and not a lot of change happened. And so part of what I was exploring too with my thesis was, are we really listening to the Mongolian stakeholders about where
Yeah.
they're at and what what changes they'd like to make, or are we imposing a Western model, on another country and saying, this is what you need to do, this is what works best? Because we're talking about a model in Mongolia that's, totally segregated, separate schools, separate everything. And here, folks are coming in and saying, oh, now just put everybody together and, we'll provide some training and see how it goes, take it from 0 to 60, whereas, it took, and it's still happening here in America. We're not perfect by any means, but it took a long time to get inclusion in schools. So, and it's something we still fight for today. So, so I think it's kind of naive to say we can go somewhere else and tell someone else that they should just, implement these things and it'll all work out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that this is really kind of such a great part of how international exchange has kind of helps give you that insight. I mean, I just, I wouldn't have, all the stuff kind of resonates so much. I mean, as I'm listening to you with this, and kind of, I don't know how it would have if I hadn't really had those experiences. I mean, you also, though, I think you mentioned you have a disability, right? How does, tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I have 2 wonderful parents who are guidance counselors. I was very lucky to have them in my life. And so when I was in about 4th or 5th grade, they realized I was really struggling with math and science. So they had me tested, for a learning disability. And sure enough, I still to this day have a math processing disorder. And so what that did to me kind of at that point in my life, kind of that middle school, pre-teen time, I immediately shut down and was like, I can't do math, can't do science, never going to get it, that kind of thing. So I think I kind of imposed a really negative sense about math upon myself, which then I had to work through, because sure enough, you still have to go to math class, and you still have to, pass algebra, and you still have to take,
Yep.
ACTs or SATs. And I really, really struggled with those things. And I was not, I'm to this day not very good at math and not very good at science stuff, but I am very good at, verbal expression. So I can explain lots of things. But the thing that it made me do was really think about, what does it mean to be disabled, and looking at that context piece again. And then also thinking about how, having that label on me really impacted me in the way that I thought about myself and how I navigated the world. Now, clearly I had enough support and, had enough, kind of personal ability to power through that. I've had a lot of opportunities in my life and a lot of privilege. I was able to go on to college and get a master's degree and do Peace Corps and get a Fulbright. So the math thing didn't really hold me back. But if I had to take a statistics course now, I might need some little extra tutoring, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, who knows? I mean, some of those students that you had, it's interesting, like you mentioned about, and this kind of gets you thinking about who is disabled. I mean, some of those students of your teachers that you were working with in Mongolia might have even had disabilities that you didn't know about.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting piece of the Fulbright research. One of the questions that I would ask focus groups of teachers is, what is disability? And so, I mean, it's a very open-ended question. Um, and there's also kind of language pieces that work well in English, but don't work as well in
Yeah,
Mongolian. And so I had to work through a lot of that. My Mongolian's pretty good. It's not perfect. And I worked a lot with, native Mongolian speakers who also spoke English so that I would like phrase things properly when I was doing my focus groups. But, their answers were really interesting. They'd often say, they'd go for obvious things. So like a physical disability or something you could see, a visible
sure.
disability. But they didn't have the specific language for students with cognitive or intellectual disabilities. So usually that came out as someone saying, a slow student or a stupid student. Like the direct translation would be stupid. And so, it's kind of parsing that out of like, what is that? And, the other pieces about like, how is disability acquired? That was a really fascinating conversation. So I think to kind of go back to your question, like having those conversations with the people in the country about like just a very open conversation about what is a disability and what does that mean to you and what does that look like in your classroom was really, really interesting. So, and I was so appreciative to be able to have those open conversations because the teachers also knew that I had been a teacher. Um, and this is kind of a funny aside, but during my time as a Peace Corps volunteer teaching in a Mongolian school, I got a teacher pin, which they give to teachers who have taught for a certain amount of time. And my school director gave me one. So I would wear that during my interviews with people so they could kind of see like, oh, this person was a teacher. They'd ask me about where I taught, if they didn't know me. And that gave me kind of a little bit of an entry point. So that was
Was that kind of the idea behind that pin? That
Oh
was the
yeah.
kind of to help credential you a little bit more?
Oh yeah. It greased the
Yeah,
wheels a little bit.
grease the wheels a little bit. That makes sense. Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is interesting too. I mean, going back to that, you made an interesting comment that I think is something that I've heard people ask about when going abroad. As well. I'm going to this country where they think that disabled people are cursed, or they think disabled people are reincarnated
Hmm.
sinners, or any variety of things. I mean,
Hmm.
it makes me think too. Actually, I think in certain strands of Protestant culture, they think people with disabilities are being punished by God, or in certain
Hmm.
strands of Judaism also. But then it sounds like what your experience was too I remember there's this girl, just on another side note, who had told me, when I was giving a talk about international exchange to a group, and this girl who was originally from India was like, yeah, my country, they think I'm possessed, so I don't know if I could really study there any time. And but it sounds like kind of that's every culture kind of has this subtext, like I was kind of saying, but then it's sort of something that maybe impacts the way people interact with you, but then it's also kind of like something that you can't always assume that it's something that everybody unilaterally just across the board believes either.
Yeah. And I mean, it's,
It's kind of like in Latin America. I mean, they say 90% of them are Catholics, but then hardly anybody is practicing.
and I think for a researcher that gives like a really interesting topic, right? Like, why do we believe the things that we believe? And just exploring that with people. I think like if we can
Yeah,
kind of uproot why we believe something, not just that we believe it, it makes it more challenging for people to think through kind of why they believe what they believe. And
was there anything about like the way that you kind of thought about things as an American that you started to at least take a second look at when you had your experiences in
like
Mongolia?
every day.
Every day?
Every day. Yeah. I mean, I think, and I find this in my current life too, not, in my life, I think it started for me in my
You
time.
advise parents now of students with physical disabilities who are going to college.
Yeah. So, in my work with Accessible College, which I work with students and families, students with physical disabilities and health conditions as they transition to college. So, I have a lot of opportunities to help people kind of think about how they're thinking about things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the best way to put it, or think about things they haven't thought of. But so I think like a lot of that for me started, in my time in Mongolia. I had a lot of time by myself in Peace Corps too, for
Mm-hmm.
better or worse, but you have a lot of time to think and reflect on, I feel this way. Why do I feel this way? Or I saw this today. How did that impact me? And I think that was really valuable time for me personally. Part of my work journey too was I worked at the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, which is a university center in every state and territory that works on disability issues. And then after that, I was working at Georgetown University as the associate director of the Academic Resource Center, where I worked with students with physical disabilities and health conditions as well. And that's where I advised a lot of students, Georgetown students, who were, considering study abroad or considering taking even service trips abroad, and helped them and the counterparts, on the other side of the world kind of think about what it would mean for this student with this physical disability or with this health condition to go to that country. And my Peace Corps experience and my Fulbright experience really helped me with that, because I was able to better understand what it meant to live or to be in a context outside of the United States. And I was able to think through some things that I think maybe people who hadn't really been abroad wouldn't have been able to think about or wouldn't have known to think about. So so that was these international experiences have really opened my eyes, not just about international stuff, but also about life in the US.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know for me, I definitely had experiences like that too about, when I was in Mexico and getting to know my blind friend who lives in Michoacan, it really changes. I had to kind of reevaluate my idea of what it was to be a successful blind person. And it's definitely a life-changing opportunity and experience, going overseas. And is there any, yeah.
I think I shared, and this builds off what your story was, but one of my best Mongolian friends, Oidov is his name. He has a physical disability, and he was able to meet up with some doctors when he was a young kid from Shriners Hospital. So he ended up coming to the States for a number of surgeries. I think something like over 15 surgeries.
Wow.
And so he ended up learning English here in the States. And then, lives in Mongolia and has had a really successful career. Now he runs a business where he imports disability, daily living, disability support equipment to Mongolia.
Wow.
And in my time being with him, he would always say, yeah, I could go live in the US, but I wouldn't have the community that I have here in Mongolia and the support that I have. For example, like we would take a taxi together and, we'd flag it down, and the taxi driver, who he didn't even know, would just come out and literally pick him up and put him in the taxi cab. And that was totally acceptable. And he was fine with that as well. Because, he needed that support getting into the vehicle, and he didn't want me to have to do it, because he thought it was, kind of weird maybe for a woman to be doing that. But, but he, it was totally fine. And he said, in the States, I can't really say to someone, hey, can you pick me up? Or, hey, can you do this for me? Like, you're expected to live more independently.
Right. Or have an attendant, one or the other.
Or have an attendant. Yeah. As a person with a disability. And
which that can be a barrier in its own way. For people trying to keep jobs.
Quite frankly, like the perception of your body is very different in Mongolia. Like, people touch each other more often. It's not weird to come into close proximity with someone. And so, I think that would be, if I was a person with a physical disability and I was traveling there, that would be something I'd have to probably prepare myself for. It's even as a person without a physical disability, I have to prepare myself for it, because people literally will, sit on your lap or sit very, very close to you. There is no bubble space, but people often want to help out, and so they'll, grab someone by the arm or offer to pick them up, or, whatever that is. But having my friend Oidov kind of talk to me about these things and show me a lot of stuff in Mongolia was really eye-opening to get his perception and his perspective about life as a person with a physical disability in Mongolia. And that friendship actually opened a lot of doors for me into the disability and community in Mongolia. So I was, making that connection was something I was really, really happy about, and I'm very thankful for even today.
Wow. Yeah. Kind of like, it reminds me of my connection with my friendship with my friend Omar. It's really opened up a lot of doors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been such a great interview. I just wanted to say thanks so much. Is there any last thing that you want to share or that you think we should touch on?
Well, I have to give a shameless plug for myself and say that if folks are interested in what Accessible College does, you can always check out www.accessiblecollege.com. And I'm also going to be at the upcoming conference. I don't know if this probably won't air before that goes on, Justin.
No, alas, it will not.
But maybe if people are interested in what I talked about at the conference, I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint with you. So I think that could possibly be shared with folks, or we could link to that as well.
Yes.
I also have blogs. And so I work with a number of the Georgetown students that I worked with previously. I actually have a monthly blog feature where I have students with physical disabilities and health conditions talk about their experience transitioning to college and kind of things they wish they had known. So if you go to the Accessible College website, you can check out those blog posts there as well.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, that's great to know. I mean, also, I guess I'll make a shameless plug, www.musa.org. It sounds like we both, you also, it sounds like, have great insights about if I'm a person with a physical disability and looking to go overseas. It sounds like great opportunities there also, it sounds like, too. You're probably are you looking for any blog posts from any alumni with physical disabilities?
Yeah. I would love that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're looking to get yourself published also, consider
I have a lot of Twitter followers and a Facebook page, and I push these things out. So
nice. That's important. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Annie. It's been really great to talk with you, and we will be looking forward to putting this out and sharing it with the world. So have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, same to you, Justin.
And that concludes Ripple Effects, Travelers with Disabilities Abroad. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends. If you really feel positively about us, we would appreciate it if you would leave us a review on iTunes. All of those things will help us get the word out to more people. See you next time.